Shimmy, thanks very much for taking the time to do the interview with us.
No problem.
You grew up in Terranor in the 1970s. Tell us a bit about your upbringing.
Well, I don't remember very much about it.
How come?
I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm just very much living in the present, or maybe because it was so long ago.
Okay.
But I mean, it was happy enough childhood. Was pretty much obsessed with film and music even early on, so they would have informed a lot of the happiest memories, I guess. There's 4 boys. I was the eldest of 4, so we were basically, it was like WWE every day.
Constantly fighting then, yeah?
Oh yeah, we killed each other, of course. Great. So every week would be someone else's turn to go up to casualty to get something fixed. Or
were they all like the same size? Was it one bigger than the other?
Pretty much, yeah. Except the youngest, when he came along, he ended up being taller than all of us, and so
and had his revenge. Your father, Lewis, is it Lewis or Louis? Louis is an Academy Award nominated filmmaker. Big influence on your career?
I think he's a big influence on my career because he's my father.
Yes.
Growing up, I didn't really get what he did. You know, I knew he made films, and but my idea of films back then was Hollywood, was, you know, things you'd see in the big blockbusters in the cinema. He was making documentaries which were being seen in the cinema in those days, but I didn't equate it with what he was doing with kind of Hollywood and stars and that. So even when he'd go off to the Oscars, we were more concerned about getting a decent present when he came back. You know, it didn't really land until much later on exactly what he was doing and how interesting it was. So the influence I got from him would have been not so much on a technical level, but on things like work ethic, you know, leaving no stone unturned when you're researching a subject or something like that. Both my parents were very creative, and just kind of losing yourself in the work, total absolute enthusiasm for it, so it becomes everything, and that would have been kind of the predominant influence, I guess. Was there a certain age where you decided, yeah, you know, filmmaking was... I think when I was 6 or something, 5, I saw Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I know I tell the story all the time, and I didn't know what was happening on that screen, but I knew I had to have something to do with what they were doing. Oh, wow. And it wasn't until years later I began to get an idea of what... I mean, originally it was acting was the main ambition and goal. I didn't really get what directors were doing. Everything I was seeing was being filtered through the performances. That's where I saw the magic. So that's what I wanted to be involved in. So it was only later then I started actually making films, and it developed through there. Cool. We'll come back to that later. Your most recent short, Hannah Cohen's Holy Communion, deals with a young Jewish girl looking to make her Holy Communion. How big an influence does religion have on your career and in your life, considering your Jewish heritage? How did you find it growing up? Pretty much not... For me, it wasn't a hugely enjoyable experience, because what I got from it was a sense of being different, and not in a positive way. Because I think when you're a teenager, what the thing that you want most is to fit in, to be part of the gang and everything. And growing up Jewish, I was very much aware, particularly in such a predominantly Catholic country, where priests still wore collars and stuff, that you weren't like everyone else. You know, you were different in that you, even in growing up in later years, were a very traditional Jewish family. So going out on a Friday night was out of the question. Things like that. So you'd watch your friends going out in the tear and the rip, and you couldn't, you know, you were kind of looking at your nose pressed against the window. So for me, and also at the time, I was very much conscious that, you know, 100 miles up the road, Protestants and Catholics were slaughtering each other over religion. So I didn't understand the benefit of religion, and I still don't see the benefit of it for me. I think for older people, maybe they're in their faith, it gives them great solace. But so I had very strong views quite early on that I wasn't a fan of religion, and so it really didn't. As I was growing up, I didn't really have any interest in telling religious stories per se, or stories about my own religion. So it was just a kind of a weird coincidence that Hannah Cohen came about.
Did you feel excluded?
Well, I was excluded.
You were excluded.
Yeah. Now, at the time, there was a relatively healthy Jewish community in Dublin. There would have been maybe up to 5,000 people. I think it's down to 1,500 now. But the grass was always greener as far as I was concerned. I didn't, it's like when you're told you can't hang out with these people, but you can hang out here.
It's the one thing you want to do is hang out with them.
Exactly, yeah. So, and most of my friends were non-Jewish around that time as well, and so it was difficult as a young teenager. There would have been certain aspects of my social life that would have to remain private, that I couldn't share with the family, or in terms of bringing girls home and that kind of thing. So you do feel different. And what I think it gave me, if it had an influence on my work in any way, was it maybe gave me a sense of the outsider, the underdog, which I think, looking back, seems to be a regular theme in a lot of the work I've done. So maybe that's where that comes from. I know we'd have to ask the shrink afterwards.
Having studied advertising in Rathmines to becoming an award-winning film director and sound engineer and editor, you've certainly gone the path less travelled. How did you get to where you are today?
Jesus. Yeah.
How vague a question, eh?
How long have you got? I basically have a very short attention span, short levels of concentration, depending on what I'm doing. But so as soon as I get an idea for something I want to do, I'll do it. And then when I feel I've mastered it, or I've reached the limit of my capability with that, I'm bored and I want to move on. So with the acting thing, I never really had the balls to fully pursue it, and was very self-conscious about that, and was afraid I'd be laughed out of home. So business seemed to be the thing that I was very good at, numbers and maths and coming up with these mad scams and ideas for business. That seemed the natural route to go. But when I got into study business studies, I hated it. I detested it. And then I had a friend doing advertising that seemed more creative. So I went and did that, and then that was equally frustrating because it was kind of run by dinosaurs, the industry, and new ideas really were not what they wanted to hear. And I went travelling for years, and I came back and got into music, so I was always into music, and I did sound engineering, lighting, designing. But around that time I was starting to make my own home movies. So I'd bought a camcorder, and any time me and the mates would go away, I'd be the guy with the camcorder and I'd shoot everything. And then I would go home and edit it onto VHS player, the old record, pause, and then line up the next bit or whatever. And which was interesting because that was my film school. That taught me about shot selection, framing, editing, all that kind of stuff.
It's probably only, 20 years ago?
What do we know? And the rest? Yeah, no, maybe 30 years ago.
30 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, 30, sometime around then.
Yeah.
It was a while ago. And then, so where are we then? So there so I'm on the road a lot working with a lot of bands, because I wanted to be in a band, but I was never quite good enough. So I did the next best thing, which was I became a lighting designer, which meant I used to play the lighting desks like a keyboard. So it was the next best thing to being in the band, and getting the lifestyle as well, though never the girls. Obviously the singer always got the girls. And then just started making music videos for some of the bands as well. Again, very crude. A lot of them were just edited on VHS machines. But and then I actually decided to just said, fuck it, I'll go for the acting thing. And I had a friend take a bunch of photographs of me in different poses and different costumes, pretending they were stills from films, and sent them around. And I just started getting auditions, loads of auditions then. And then it was while I was doing a couple of shorts, I started telling the director what to do with the camera, because I realised they weren't getting the coverage they needed or whatever. They weren't doing enough to make me look great. And that's when I kind of realised maybe the directing is more interesting.
That's great.
And then here we are.
You originally drafted your first copy of Headrush in 1994, and it made it to screens until 2003, so that's a 9-year gap. And did you encounter difficulties getting it from...
What do you think, 9 years?
Yeah, well,
when I wrote it, it wasn't like I was in the industry and I was working, writing a lot kind of thing, I didn't even know really much about the film industry at all. I wasn't involved in it. I wrote the screenplay just to kill the boredom one Christmas, because there was just usual rubbish on the telly. So, and I'd been buying these Faber and Faber screenplays for a lot of my favourite films. And through my typical arrogance, I was like, sure, I'll have a go. Like, how hard can it be?
Sure, why not?
So I wrote this thing longhand one Christmas and then sent it, and it sat in the drawer for a while. And then I decided to show it to my dad just to see, because I figured he might know whether this was any good or not. And he said it's definitely worth sending out. And he gave me the names of 3 producers, and one of them came back and offered me an option, which I thought was brilliant, and which I jumped at. But I remember I was all over it, and I was like, totally. And then went home and said to my dad, what's an option? And he said, God, what have you signed? So that was what's normally the hard bit was the easy bit. The hard bit for me was then trying to understand what I'd done and how I could make it better, and started developing that way. And then it went through other producers, and yeah, the road to financing is a very different road to the road to writing. It costs nothing to write a script, But we were trying to do the film properly. We wanted to try and raise $1 million, which was difficult because I'd almost hadn't made anything before. Mm-hmm. And it just took a long time, before we finally got it over the line to make it.
And to get the funding then took ages. Funding must have been...
Funding took about 5 years, I think.
Wow.
4 or 5 years, something like that. I think we were close a few times and it collapsed, which happens a lot,
Mm-hmm. Would you describe yourself as being very selective in what you choose to work on?
I am now.
You are now?
Yeah.
Great.
There was a time when I wasn't as selective, where you're often faced with that decision, I think, if you want to stay in the industry, where sometimes you get offered work that a little voice in the back of the brain goes, this isn't going to be great, but you got to pay bills, and and sometimes you do it and you think to yourself, I'll find a way to fix it or to make it work, and sometimes it doesn't happen, and you just got to accept you did the best job you possibly could and move on. But now I'm at the stage where I'd rather starve. Seriously.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're never going to starve. Worst case scenario is I'd have to move back in with my parents or something, which is quite the trend these days. But yeah, I think there's enough shit out there, and I don't want to contribute any more to it.
You vary your filmmaking approach by shooting like feature films, documentaries, shorts, music videos, as you said, but you don't give any like specific preference to one category. Is there any particular reason? Just like to be interested in a bit of everything?
No, I just love it all, because I never went the traditional route of film school and then you're a director, and then I think what a lot of people seems what happens is they make commercials for a long time and then they move into features, or they start the opposite way where they just start off in low budget features and then they hope to start doing some commercials to make a living. I mean, the grass is greener for both, it seems, but I've always just loved the medium of film, and I love telling stories in different ways as well, and the more inventive way of telling the story, for me, that it's not about being inventive, it's about the best way to tell this particular story. So some of them suit better in drama, some documentary, some music, and so it varies from project to project, but I've never wanted to say I'm only a features director or a documentary director, because I enjoy all the different formats and all the disciplines, and they all completely feed into each other. I find them all fascinating and exciting. Like whether it's, I could be doing a kind of a 6-camera multicam live concert, to me is as much adrenaline rush as working one-on-one with an actor in a scene and finding something very special in that moment or live. Particularly with multicam directing, you're chasing where the energy is around the stage the whole time, mm-hmm. as well as having a plan in your head, because you've listened to the song a million times beforehand, who's doing what, as such, but as long as I can do them all, it's great. I really enjoy it, totally, yeah.
In 2009, 2010, you made Soulboy, a film about the northern soul scene in the 1970s Britain. Where did the idea come from?
One of the producers on Headrush, Christine Alderson, based in the UK, is a company of Factor Films, and she'd been developing the script for a while, and she knew how much I was into music, and so she gave me a draft of the script and said, "Have a read of this, I think you'll like it." And I did.
And that's it?
Yeah, but that's all it takes sometimes, really. It's
do you
like the script, don't you?
Well, that's true, yeah. It's a very, very, I suppose, specific type of film, especially for an Irish filmmaker as well, to do a film about Northern soul dance in Britain. I
like the fact that, and I knew I was going to get grief over this, like, what does a Paddy know about the Northern soul scene in Northern England, you know what I mean? And I thought that made me even better placed to do it, because it needed someone from the outside, I thought, to come in who wasn't so precious about the scene as such.
And look at it with fresh eyes, I suppose.
Totally, yeah. And I remember, like, I'm old enough to remember growing up in the 70s and being that guy on the edge of the dance floor looking in and seeing there'd always be 2 or 3 guys who were amazing dancers who you hated, you know, and the girls would swing towards. And there was a lot of that kind of hot, sweaty atmosphere. I remember vividly. It was very much part of the Northern soul scene, except it was a lot more energetic, and they were all amazing dancers. Yeah. But the music I loved as well, and there was a great story to it, and so it was a story that I wanted to tell. Then, from a business point of view, it seemed to make sense to dip my toe in the English market and get to work with some great talent over there as well, you know. So it ticked all the boxes.
Oh, great. In 2012, you directed the short film Rhinos, which has an extremely clever, but I suppose simple plot. Where did the idea come from that?
Well, the irony of that was that I was trying to get away from plot, and that a lot of the films and scripts I've been writing had great ideas, very kind of convoluted plots and twists, and I wanted to do something that was really just coming purely from character, that was character based. So it was a combination of 3 things. It was that idea that I want something character based. It was the kind of a new approach to working with actors that I had been developing in the factory, working in the actor studio there. And then the real kind of catalyst for it was meeting the German actress, Eileen Tezel, who I met at a festival in Germany when we were showing Soulboy.
She's fantastic, huh?
Yeah, she's a quality actor. And we got on like a house on fire, and she joked when I was leaving Germany that, you know, I'd have to write something for her now, you know, and but she didn't give up, she didn't let go, and she was serious. And then to the point where she was like, I have a couple of days free in September, I can come over and we can shoot. So then I was like, okay, I have to write something. So rather than sitting there wondering what trying to create or invent a character-based story, I already had the idea that I had a German girl in Dublin. What could I do with this? So it came from there, the idea of what if she couldn't speak the language, and I'm interested in, you know, communication between people, and I thought there was huge potential for something like that, and it just evolved out of that, and literally I think 2 drafts at most.
It really reminds me of that film Ghost Dog. You seen that, The Way of the Samurai? There's a scene.
I saw that here years ago.
Yeah, it really reminds me of that when Forrest Whitaker's best friend speaks French, but they end up having the same conversation with each other, even though they don't speak the same language. But it kind of reminds me of that one vaguely. Yeah. It's very interesting though.
We'll check it out again.
Do. Jim Jarmusch is great.
Yeah.
Throughout your career, you've traversed many different projects. What or whom would you say is your main inspiration?
I have no idea. I mean, when I was really getting into cinema, I suppose it would have been around the early 80s, maybe late 70s, early 80s. I would sneak down late at night before everyone go to bed. I'd sneak down and switch on BBC Two. I think Channel 4 was starting up there, and that's where I managed to catch up on all the amazing cinema that was coming out of America in the late 60s, early 70s. So all the stuff, you know, Scorsese and Brian De Palma and all these guys were doing was just that was the real kind of that's where you go from Willy Wonka and Shitty Chitty Bang Bang to Mean Streets, you know. And so that was the kind of stuff that was influencing me a lot, I guess, at that stage. But I've never had any epic heroes like, you know, Gandhi or someone like that. My heroes are always usually kind of small local type people. You know, someone that would inspire you even on a kind of a topical sense, like Panty at the moment.
Oh yes.
Something like that, I go, fair fucking play, you know, and it makes me question, what am I really fighting for? What am I trying to say? Do I have anything to say? You know, things like that. The whistleblowers, people like that who are just constantly, you know, you feel the weight of the political bullshit they're under, and you're kind of like, well, you know, how tough is it for me, really? Those kind of small heroes, kind of, I'm very impressed by. But I think they're, you know, that cliche, we're holding out for a hero. There's very few heroes around today.
There are, I suppose it is inspiring when you see real people doing real things that matter.
Yeah. Which is why I think I like the balance of documentary stuff as well, compared to just fiction and drama. You know, that there's it kind of grounds you a little bit, I think, sometimes.
In general, what are your thoughts on the film industry in Ireland?
Yeah, well, I mean, is
there anything you like, anything you dislike, anything can be changed?
There's lots that can be changed. You know, there's a lot of very honest people working very hard, and there's a lot of people who are doing what they think is right for the industry, and we all have different ideas on how it should evolve as such, you know. I think we definitely punch well above our weight, and we have an extraordinary brand on the international stage. From it was more so in our actors and certainly to our directors to a certain extent, that we have some very, very good crews here, you know. Mm-hmm. And there's usually an Oscar nomination for a short film each year or something, either in drama or animation. I think that's an extraordinary record. But I would love to see a lot more money go into smaller films, more micro-budget films. I don't understand why we have to give some films 9. When I say we, I mean the Irish Film Board, obviously. Yeah. You know, you can't do an interview without having a good bitch about the Irish Film Board. Even though they've supported me at times over my career. Why they would give, you know, a film $1 million, you know, for me, I was like, you can make 10 micro-budget films for that. And I think the other problem we have is that there seems to be, and this is maybe a universal thing to a certain extent, there only seems to be one way of developing a feature film, which is the script is king, and everything goes into the script, and it's all about the script and getting the script polished and the 3-act structure, yada 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 yada. And then they go and shoot it, and it doesn't always work because that's the way it is. You know, mm-hmm. when you make, you know, when you create music, you demo it. When you create a painting, you sketch it. You do all these different things. With film, it seems like you go out and you spend a ton of money on a 5-week shoot, and that's it. You might have enough for another day or two. So I don't understand why they don't look at other methods of development, and instead of spending vast amounts of money, that they should really spend more money on the development part of developing, for example, as we do in the factories, developing with actors. The actors are very much involved in the evolution of the script and the development of the script. So by the time you've got to shoot your film, you've pretty much rehearsed the whole film, and you know what works and what doesn't to a certain extent, which I think even economically makes a lot more sense, because the amount of times you'll go out and you'll spend $1 million on a shoot and then discover you're not even using 25% of what you've shot, you know. And then you have to spend a load more money going out to shoot new scenes to try and fix what isn't working in the edit. So I'd like to see a lot more money go into micro budget and development to that sense. But I think I think we're blessed the fact that we have state support. So many countries don't have that. I think sometimes I wonder maybe we should just get rid of the whole thing and then see what it's like, and that'll really filter out who really needs to make a film. Because if they want to, then they'll just do it. All the equipment is there, you know.
when you actually take stuff away from people, generally creativity will thrive, will prosper more,
it always
because
has done. Artists always flush her in bad times and good times, and it'll just get done. Like there's a guy, I won't mention any names, but there's someone shooting a feature film in the factory at the moment. They're shooting 15, 16 pages a day. Actors are playing 3 and 4 characters, and they're basically demoing the feature in 10 days. It's cost them nothing, and they'll cut it themselves on their laptop, and in 2 months' time they'll have a rough cut of their feature, and they'll know exactly what is working, what's not, what's worth going out, really spending money on a crew, and what's not. And I don't know why we don't do that all the time.
Makes a lot more often. Makes a lot of sense, just for the film and economically as well. Yeah. It's huge. At a quick glance through your filmography, it is noticeable that your work isn't predominantly aimed at a mainstream audience.
How would you define mainstream?
For me, anyway, it would be that it's very easily accessible, and I could find it anywhere. I'd go see it anywhere in a number of different cinemas if I wanted to. Not even to be seen at a cinema, but not aimed at not aimed for the general public. It's aimed for a specific group. Going back on what you were saying earlier on, when you say, you were selective, or you weren't selective previously, but you are selective now.
Yeah.
So the stuff that you pick, would you be happy to hit it to a mainstream audience, or would you be more, I'd like this to have an impact on certain people?
But I still don't understand the definition. I mean, a lot of my work is available out there if people choose to see it. My work cannot compete with the Hollywood distribution model, so I can't put posters on buses and stuff like that. I can't compete with the stuff, so I can't market it in that sense. Mm-hmm. Though ask me about that in a minute, because there's an interesting point about that as well I'll come back to. But at the same time, when you create something, you're not saying I'm only making it for this demographic. When you make something, the idea is that you hope everyone will see it, but obviously it's not realistic. But you'll find an audience, per se. It's so I'm at the mercy of whatever distribution models are out there, per se. If I make a short film, there's like, for example, the example of Rhinos, that's on telly next week, and it'll probably get seen by more people on that TV slot than a lot of features will get seen today, in the cinemas. So, and
deservedly so. It's a great film.
It works. It seems to work with whatever audience. I don't know who I made it for. Actually, the truth of Rhinos is that I made it for myself. That I actually didn't care who saw it, or I didn't pander to any audience. We self-financed ourselves. I used I think there was 3 crew at most. We just went back to the old school of filmmaking. Just grab a camera, grab a mic. Okay, now we happen to have a really good camera and a good mic, and but it was just something I totally made for myself. I didn't give a fuck about anybody else, and it just resonated with everyone. I think what happens is sometimes we pander to our audience too much sometimes. So that was a film that I thought no one would see, and it'll end up. I mean, we've sold that film all over the world. It's still traveling festivals. It'll be on. It's been on TV in other countries, so it'll probably get seen by more people than a mainstream feature film in this country. So it depends on what your definitions are,
Okay.
And this through online platforms. I mean, you can watch any feature I've made online. You download them illegally if you want. You'll watch it. There's a lot of work up on the website. But that's the reality.
It is. Yeah, it is. I think every man and dog in the street at this stage is downloading something illegally. Yeah, I mean, it's the things will find an audience, and you could argue like what month is this? Where are we now? February. It's February. Mm-hmm. Okay, so last March, I put out a documentary feature that I made, a music documentary that you could say, well, it's music, it's artsy, it's not really mainstream at all. We had one night released in the Sugar Club and 4 nights in the factory, and we had
no P&A support from the film board from anyone else, and we did more business than 2 or 3 major Irish feature drama films that had a mainstream cinema release with a huge P&A support, and we did better numbers than them. So the perception of what's mainstream is quite often very different to the reality of actually who sees it and what people go and see stuff, you know.
You have been described as being quite cool and calm whilst directing.
Oh, wanker. What are you
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah.
Don't let that reputation get out.
Given the pressures that a director encounters every day whilst on set, how do you manage to remain so focused?
I go home and kick the shit out of the dog. No, I don't have a dog. I love animals.
You have a cat.
You don't. I mean, it's weird because it's like, what I find is like screaming and shouting actually, well, you got to pick your moments for it. But at the end of the day, I don't think it really achieves a huge amount. There's got to be a right time for it, obviously. But my experience is you get so much more out of people by taking to them aside and talking to them quite calmly, as we're doing now, as opposed to humiliating them in front of a crew or. And I've seen directors completely, what I call psycho fuck actors, and play with them just to get certain performances out of them and things like that. You hear all sorts of stories, but I prefer to be honest and collaborate with them as opposed to just to play with them in that sense. So I've generally find that losing your mind and getting angry and screaming doesn't really help the creative process, and it doesn't put me in a good frame of mind to open my own mind to solving problems creatively. And it's generally nicer if it's a better atmosphere, I find,
I think so, yeah. I think going back on what you say, psycho fuck, was it? Is that not very depending on how good the character that they're working with is? I mean, to push them to the.
Well, that's it depends on the character and the actor, but I wouldn't. What I say by psycho fuck with them is, I mean, I wouldn't play games with them. I wouldn't manipulate in the sense like you hear stories of, what movie was it? Lenny, to Dustin Hoffman. Dustin Hoffman plays is in a film called Lenny, the story of Lenny Bruce, and there's a scene where his old girlfriend is on the phone sobbing to him, and the story goes, I don't know if it's true, but the story goes that the director found out that the actress's father had died, and had decided to keep the information away from her until they went to do that scene. So that for me is kind of where you psychofuck someone, where you manipulate. Like I say, I don't know if that's true, that's alleged. But that kind of idea that you totally manipulate your actors in some ways. Now, I think you can do that to a certain extent without, where it's okay to keep an actor in the dark for a specific reason in relation to what's happening. Maybe you don't want them to know what's happening in the story and you want to get a more natural reaction out of them.
One doesn't get too personal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, you do want it to be personal. It's all personal. It's completely personal. Acting is
true.
all.
I think if somebody was keeping information from me that my dad had passed away, I think I'd lose the plot.
Yeah, obviously that's a little extreme.
Yeah,
but it depends. You have to gauge on the actor and what they want. Some actors love that kind of approach, to be involved, where they want anything at all to help them with their, develop the character and find that. And some actors are like, I just want the lines in advance and trust me to do the job. So that's the challenge you have sometimes, where you can have two very different style of actors in the same scene or something, in the same film.
As you've already said, you have a keen interest in music. So tell us a bit about it. What kind of music? Into all music? Is there any particular forms that you like more than others?
I've never really gotten into country, and I don't understand why.
So you're not going to Garth Brooks then?
I actually do want to go to Garth Brooks.
Really?
Well, I want to see what the fuss is about.
I think everybody does, but
I think he probably has an amazing show. The show itself is probably extraordinary. I think any event where you're going to have 80,000 people having this kind of religious experience, to me, is interesting. Regardless of what the music is. I don't think I could do it for too long at a death metal concert, but even that is visually quite interesting. I know it'll be interesting because also most of it is going to be Americans. For like 70% of the ticket sales for Garth Brooks came from abroad, so it's not going to be full of Irish country people. But no, I listen to anything, really.
Who's your favourite band, if you had to pick one?
Oh God, I can't pick one. There's always, like, I can never pick a favourite film. There'd always be 5 or something that resonated. So, but Beatles and the Stones.
You listen to anything new at the moment?
Yeah, well, it's weird. You get into these bands. Like, I was listening to Little Green Chorus for quite a while, and then suddenly they became mainstream, and they weren't as interesting anymore. It's kind of like, you get the demos and you fall in love with the demos, and then they go into the studio and record it properly, and sometimes you kind of miss the roughness and the rawness to the edge of it quite a bit. And there was someone else I discovered recently. Was it the Notas? I can't remember. There's so many great bands coming through now. I can't keep track anymore, really, to be honest with you. I find I'm going back in time listening to stuff rather than going forward,
Yeah, I think a lot of people are doing that. I think some people just can't get to grips with new music, so they go back and they start listening to the old music.
Circle of electronica. I remember when electronica first came out. Well, in my period, I'm sure it was out before then. Even more, they were playing with computers back in the 50s and 60s. But it's all. I don't hear anything new. It's very hard to hear something new. When you get to my age, it all sounds very very recycled. So for me, the last really holy shit rock moment was Nirvana. I haven't heard anything since then that for me kind of I suppose Radiohead to a certain extent. But yeah, it's been a while since I've heard anything that made me lose my mind.
Yeah, Man is a good one actually, and that's 93. Even before then.
Yeah, before then. First album was before that, yeah.
Are you currently working on anything at the moment that we can look forward to?
I'm just finishing now a documentary on Irish composer Ian Wilson and poet Leontia Flynn, who did a residency in Telehospital observing Parkinson's patients for a couple of weeks. And from that went away and wrote a musical score and some poetry that they performed then in the hospital a year later as part of the Arts Health Programme at Telehospital. So for me, it was an interesting idea about learning more about Parkinson's and discovering with that, but it's actually really about the creative processes of how you turn that experience into music and into poetry. Mm-hmm. So I'm just finishing that off at the moment, and a couple of scripts trying to nail down.
Look forward to seeing the documentary. Tell us a bit about the factory and the Actors Studio. What's it about?
The factory was set up by John Carney, Kirsten Sheridan, Lance Daly, and the idea was, which is something I kind of get because I've known them all for a long time, and I remember John back in the Frame when he was in the Frames days, and we used to hang out, and there was a real sense of community. And I always remember thinking it's a shame that the film community didn't have something like that so many writers and directors work in a vacuum, and there's no real huge collaboration in that sense or place. So they set up the factory as a place where filmmakers could go and hang out and share ideas, and the other idea was to start training actors, because what we found is that over the years, so many of the auditions that we do when we're casting films is that everyone coming in would have an awful lot of theatre training, which is very different to what we need for film. Sure. And then there was a new generation coming through that were all kind of very shouty and basically over the top. So the idea was that we could train in actors ourselves, and we would have this amazing commune or clique of just great actors that we could use to make lots of low budget films. So we basically fulfilled the first half of that in creating the actor studio and the program, and we have some amazing talent in there, but we never completed the second half, which was the making film parts. That they're all still. We've done some films. Kirsten did did Dollhouse. Some of that came out through there, and Lance did some stuff there as well on Life's a Breeze, and John did the Rafters, but they've all been doing their mainstream stuff as well, the big stuff, big budget stuff as well. So we haven't done a kind of a low budget feature yet. We're working on one at the moment.
It's on the cards.
It's on the cards, yeah. But it's a great environment in which you can, for example, I could be working on a scene that's not working. I can open the door, grab 3 actors, workshop it for an hour, and now I know why the scene's not working. So there's a great sense of community in there, and we do a lot of workshops, and we get a lot of guests, and we had Richard Dreyfuss in last week, and it's really it's totally all about the work and the art. It's just, there's zero bullshit. We don't, we're not interested. No one in there is interested in being famous. They're just interested in doing quality work, and the less interested we are in that side of things, the better they. It's the success seems to be. Like every time I switch on the telly, I see a bunch of our guys. We have this weird, very kind of great pride you take in seeing how their careers are evolving. I guess the biggest example of that is Jack Rayner, who's really flying now. Yeah,
he's really
it
after taking
it's
it by
happened.
storm.
Yeah, overnight. It seems like only yesterday I was wiping his napping. I'm only saying that just to piss him off. But
the story he has for going over to America is great. Apparently went over to New York with $30 in his pocket. Yeah, I know, it's a bit
it's a great story.
It's quite outlandish, but I suppose if Michael Bay likes to tell it.
No, he is. He's he was broke. I remember like dropping him off. I don't know if it was the week before he was going, and he got me to drop him off at some bus stop. And just as I was pulling off, he knocks back on the window, goes, "Actually, any chance I could borrow the bus fare from you?" And I was like, get back in the fucking car, for God's sake. So they are broke, Yeah. But they do, and some of them very bravely have made choices not to take the full-time job, that they would rather spend the days reading scripts, creating self-taping, practicing self-taping, coming in, workshopping stuff, and that's the kind of balls and dedication you need, I think, to make it. Particularly because we live in a world where so many people are self-taping now. They're not just competing against them, the smaller pool here. There's anyone can send self-tapes into casting directors. So, and it means that they can also self-audition themselves and send tapes to America. So they're working on accents all the time as well, so they can compete over there without having to fly.
Or stroll down to Filmbase and audition for Star Wars, if you want. Actors on the programme actually refer to the naturalistic approach you take to acting. Is there any particular work you like to do with actors in relation to developing a character?
A lot of the work that we do, it just takes time. It takes a lot of time and investment, and it's a dialogue. So it's an exploration, and what I love to do is if you tell someone how to do something, they don't get it as much as if they discover it themselves. So a lot of it is just trying to nudge them in certain directions until they make the discoveries themselves. So a lot of it is about discoveries. For example, like in the program, on the very first day of the program, I take them all out into town. We usually go to Jervis Street. And their exercise for the next 2 to 3 hours is to follow people, stalk them around town, and just observe them, the way that they actually behave when they're not being, the way people behave when they're not, feel like they're not being watched. The way they walk, the way they carry themselves, the way they behave in front of other people, the way they behave when they think they're completely on their own. And then they come back and we discuss it, and then they create scenes based on the characters that they've observed in these situations. And that's always a really interesting exercise for them, because they discover an awful lot about people. How many people have nothing to do with their time? They just literally following them for like 10-15 minutes and realize they're actually not going anywhere. They're just killing time, or they're just wandering, and just very bizarre incidents that happen to them in the street. So it's about keeping your eyes open and your ears open as well, and just seeing what's around. I think we just kind of go through life with our heads down and blinkered and such, so it's about kind of opening up their eyes to the world around them and just taking ownership of the world which we all did when we were kids anyway, until that was beaten out of us. So it's really getting them back into that kind of mental state is the starting point, and then they start finding start looking for characters to develop themselves, and then just really trying to get a sense big time of getting in touch with themselves and finding out who they are themselves. It sounds a bit psychobabbly, but that's the basis for what we do. We think it makes it more interesting. You can't be somebody else. Well, you can't be somebody else anyway, but you can't play a character if you don't understand who you are yourself.
That's a very very interesting technique. You can only imagine it opens the actors to what they imagine, or becoming more comfortable with themselves, and especially when they have cameras on them, or sound equipment in front of them and stuff like that they don't, it feels like it's not there at all. They're just who they are.
Well, it's getting them to own the camera. I mean, the camera is there, but instead of trying to block it out, which you can't do, it's accepting the camera is there and taking ownership over it, which is fine. Because if you act as if the camera's there and you're thinking to yourself, okay, just don't get freaked out by the camera, don't notice, the camera sees that. So what the camera sees is someone trying to avoid looking at the camera. Whereas if you're totally conscious of and aware of the camera, and it's not a big deal, if you take ownership over the camera, then it's far more interesting. It's not a problem. And then with that comes the learning of the craft of how to manipulate the use of the camera. So understanding that if you can't see the camera can't see you. So if someone's moving in a scene, it's just that drifting forward just a little bit until you can be in the shot, or finding out where the light is if an actor moves and suddenly the light is blocking your face. It's been able to move ever so subtly, so you're being lit. So it's a combination of all those kind of craft work and technique as such.
Is there anybody that you hope to collaborate with in the future?
See, it's weird because I'd love to work with P.T. Anderson, but I don't know how that would work because he's a director as well. But I would even just workshopping stuff with him would be interesting. I would have loved to work with Philip Seymour Hoffman. Sadly, that's not going to happen. I don't know. I mean, as long as I'm working with people who I think are much better than me, I'm happy, because otherwise I'm not really going to learn as much. I would always try and work with people who are much better than me. Because you have to keep raising your own bar as such. But I've never been a staff worker in this, saying I have to work with someone like that. Just talent I'd just love to work with, just amazing talent, or even just new talent. I find that really refreshing as well, where we some of the actors we work with in the studio, the program, are quite young, and some of them actually don't have any idea how good they are, which is amazing to experience, And when you can get talent that raw or whatever, it's get to it before it's been destroyed by any other kind of bad teaching or bad acting teaching is just fabulous. So you're just nurturing stuff the whole time, and that for me is equally as rewarding.
So this is the dreaded question that we're going to ask most people. What is your favourite film? And you said you generally say between you can give us maybe 5, but if you had to pick one.
I always say it started with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, so I'll just have to say Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Yeah.
Cool. When you look back over your career, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Well, it's that yes and no answer, isn't it? Yes, because I made a balls of this or balls of that, or no, because every mistake I've made has been part of the learning curve. This cliche, I wouldn't change anything. I certainly would change some things.
Was there any one thing in particular that sticks out in your mind that you go, God, if I got another shot at that?
No. Sometimes I think maybe I should have started this game when I was younger instead of waiting till I think I was 32, 33 before I made my first short. That if I'd have started that 10 years earlier. But I think those 10 years that I spent doing a million other things were as valuable in terms of life experience. I think that's another key thing we tell our actors as well, is like, you know, you have to go out and live, because if you're just sheltered, you won't get any experience of life or meeting with other people or human contact and learning about the world out there. So I'm kind of glad I've did all that stuff as well. So no regrets now.
Great. Considering how difficult it is to make a living in the film industry, is there any advice that you give to budding Irish filmmakers?
You just don't. Yeah, it's very easy to say don't worry about making a living, but you have to do that. Really, if you're doing it for the money, forget it. Find a different.
Has to be about passion.
Yeah, well, it's got to be about the art. I mean, the art has got to be what feeds you, feeds the soul. If you're not getting from that, then try accountancy or something else. I don't know. Not that there's anything wrong with accountancy; it's a noble profession. But it's if you're just doing it to get rich. I remember meeting this kid in film school, and he was like, "I can't decide whether to be a director or producer, but I'm leaning towards producing because they make more money." I was like, "Yeah, you sound like a producer, all right, but really get out now, kid." No, I mean, you just got to do it for the love of the art, you know. And if your heart's not in it, then
stop.
Yeah.
To finish off the interview, we're going to do this thing where I'm going to say two options, and you pick one. First one that comes into your head.
B.
Rugby or soccer?
Soccer.
Hitchcock or Kubrick?
Kubrick.
Bob Marley or Bob Dylan?
Marley.
Guinness or Heineken?
Guinness.
Comedy or drama?
Comedy.
Tom Hanks or Tom Cruise?
Hanks.
Hurling or football?
Hurling.
Tea or coffee?
Tea.
Sopranos or The Wire?
I'd love to say True Detective.
It's unbelievable.
Sopranos.
Film or music?
Music.
Wow. Shimmy Marcus, thank you very much for taking the time to do the interview with us.
Marcus.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Cheers.
Cheers.